Hi, I'm Stephanie Ricca, Editorial Director of Hotel News Now, here with STR's Isaac Collazo and CoStar's Jan Freitag for another episode of Tell Me More, a hospitality data podcast. Hi, guys.
Hey, Steph.
Ho, ho, ho. Hi, Steph.
In this episode, we will take a look at the November preliminary data, talk about typical travel trends in December to see how the year is closing up, and then we will do a fun, dare I say fun, look back at 2023 in review. Everybody's doing it. We've got to do it too. But let's start by taking a look at November as a little data tidbit. RevPAR up 2.7%, driven by ADR growth. Jan, unpack November for us a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. So this is preliminary. We're recording this before the actual data drops, but because we have the weekly data at the beginning of December, we can also always just roll up the weekly numbers. So November prelim RevPAR up, just under 3%, 2.7%, driven by room rate up, just under 4%. Actually 3.8%, but that's a pretty healthy increase in room rate. What that implies then is that occupancy declined minus 1.1%. Because supply growth is, again, de minimis. What that means is that demand was sort of flat, slightly down. Nothing really to be too concerned about. But RevPAR growth of 3% is, a good, healthy, sort of normal, steady state performance. And then if you go down the food chain, you get to upper upscale, had another, kind of okay month, RevPAR up 5%. But of course, the problem child economy type properties, RevPAR down almost 5% as well.
None of our hotels are problem childs. Come on, let's be clear.
You
Every
love them
hotel
equally the
has its
same.
value and is doing well. It's a little softness in their performance, Jan. Let's be clear.
The other thing that was soft, and that this is a really interesting sort of nerdy data point. So for luxury chain affiliated hotels, their room rate was down minus 0.9%. But for all luxury hotels, that includes the independents, room rates are up 5%. So it's like, wow, how do you get an almost 6-point swing? Well,
can you say Las Vegas?
Can you say Las Vegas? Can you say Red Bull and Formula One? Las Vegas ADR was up 28%. And those are high-end luxury independent casinos, and that drove the luxury class data.
And it actually drove.
I had to.
Oh my God. I'm on autopilot now. Okay. It actually drove the entire industry. We really want to talk about it because our prelim numbers say that ADR for the industry was up 3.8. If you exclude Las Vegas, it drops to 2.5% ADR growth. And then it also takes down, obviously, RevPAR growth, because without Las Vegas, RevPAR growth for the country would have been about 1.7%. So do markets matter? Hell yeah. Do events matter? Hell yeah. And that was one hell of an event in Vegas and that produced a lot of revenues. And obviously you've seen some of the pieces that Hotel News Now produced, as well as CoStar, talking about the revenue gains from F1 alone. So very, very strong growth out of Vegas in November.
One of the trends you all have been talking about all year, of course, not really a trend, but a growth pattern, I guess, is the buzzword, normalization. Is this what you would expect from a normal November as the year winds down and the events calendar around it winds down?
Other than F1, which is not a normal event, right? It seemed pretty normal. Everything I looked at when we're looking week by week, it felt back to normal. The only thing that doesn't feel that's different is when we started off this discussion is economy hotels, right? So that's still, their softness is still weighing on the industry, but the other chain scales seem to be really performing as we would expect them to be. And one of the things, Stephanie, I've been thinking about, instead of using normalization, let's change the word. It's equilibrium. Everything's getting back to equilibrium. Everything's getting back to its state of regular performance. So yeah, I think November really, really seemed to me just what it should be. The other interesting piece about November, though, was, again, there was increased leisure travel during that the Thanksgiving week, and we saw that in the TSA numbers, record amount of people flying. So I think that still gives us indication that this whole post-COVID environment of experiences, being with family, leisure travel overall still remains very, very strong and ingrained. And I just don't see that going away. And that's going to be, again, a primary driver for the remainder of December and Christmas holiday travel, as well as going into the future. Not only 24, but 25, 26, and 27. So I think that's important to keep looking at.
Jan, last month we talked about the absolute spree that New York City has been on, and the preliminary November data shows ADR up 8.6% for the month in New York City to $333. Is that correct?
Yeah, and in addition to that, occupancy up as well, 6% to 84% occupancy for the month of November. So that gets you double-digit RevPAR growth once again. Now we're able to parse that ADR data and break it out into the segments. As you know, for the upper end of the market, the luxury and upper upscale hotel, we have segmentation reports. The transient ADR preliminary in November for New York was $460, and the group rate was $430. So Isaac and I talked last time about New York City being in this perfect storm of not a lot of new competition, with short-term rentals being taken off the market, 16,000 rooms being taken off to house the unhoused. And once the pipeline opens those 8,000 rooms, that there's not a whole lot of new projects coming. So I'm not sure what can stop the ADR train in New York.
I know, and yeah, again, thinking about the hotels going out, as we discussed last time as well. Remember, most of those hotels have been taken out are your non-traditional New York markets, like LaGuardia, JFK. They're small markets. So when you really look at Midtown, you haven't seen very many hotels taken out there. What you're seeing there is real demand.
Mhm.
And again, goes back to what you talked about leisure. I was in New York last week. I think it was last week. I don't remember what week it was. And you couldn't get near the Rockefeller Christmas tree. You just physically could not get near it. And so, in the same thing, trying to see the display at Saks Fifth Avenue, it almost felt for me, and I've been going to New York for 25 years, and I've seen all kinds of crowd. It felt unsafe because it was so crowded, not because of security. It was just
Well, you hadn't felt crowds
Right.
that level
right.
in the
And
city at that time
talking
of year.
to you're gonna laugh at this one, but talking to a Lululemon clerk on Fifth Avenue, my favorite store, my favorite sporting goods, and so
This podcast is not brought to you by Lululemon
yes,
yet.
but the best running clothes out there. She said the same thing. We're talking to her, and she goes, she's been there since 2018. She goes, I've never seen so many people on Fifth Avenue as that Saturday that we were there. So again, goes back to this leisure surge, and most of those people were leisure, obviously, there for the Christmas season in New York, which is spectacular always. And again, that's what's going to drive. So I think New York December is going to be off the charts because it was so crowded when we were there, and the room rates, even for us in the hotel business, were expensive for that. So.
Well, speaking of that, I want to go back, just rewind a second to Jan. You said, I think you gave the difference between group negotiated was 430
Correct.
and what was 460?
Transient 465.
Okay. That's a pretty small delta. Is that typical?
Well, keep in mind that with the occupancy being in the 80% range, that's what we call, in some nights, that's compression.
That's
right. So
compression.
when the meeting
Compression,
planner,
which we haven't talked about in a while.
right, but when the meeting planner comes in August and says, hey, can I have midweek, Tuesday, Wednesday, a couple of group rooms? The revenue manager is saying, sure, you can, but guess what? They're going to be at transient rates. There's not going to be a whole lot of group discount.
Oh, we could do a whole podcast, I feel,
We could, yeah.
on not only compression, but some of these trends that kind of took a back burner during the pandemic that are starting to come back in full force. So
And I guess that's part of the recovery, Steph. I mean, again, we've been talking about this. That is things getting back to equilibrium, normalization, whatever you want to call it. That's what happens. That's normal.
I love it. So speaking of normalization, equilibrium, December, Isaac, remind us what typically happens in a December in North American travel trends. We look at the year in quarters and in months. December is usually its own particular thing.
Yeah, and it really depends on when Thanksgiving falls, right? So this year we had 30, if I remember correctly, 35 days between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So you have a few extra days, even like 2 days more than last year, if I remember correctly. So hopefully, don't quote me on that, but it is a longer period between the two holidays. That's a fact. And so what happens the first 2 weeks tend to be right after Thanksgiving. People are doing their last minute meetings. Lots of folks are on the road for budget meetings, as always, getting their budgets ready for the next year. And then you start that whole Christmas travel and shopping in certain markets like New York City, which sees that. But then as you start getting closer, like in the week we're in right now, week out of Christmas, then you start seeing this, you start seeing the slowdown, right? And so now people are getting prepared. So I would expect the weekend before Christmas that you're going to see the weekend really slow down a lot because people are already anticipating they're going to be on the road the following weekend, which, Christmas Eve is on Sunday. So they will be on the road to be with family. So you're going to start seeing a real dramatic week over week slowdown as we get to the holidays. Typically, the week of Christmas has the lowest occupancy of the year across the nation, and we expect that to happen as well. Then comes New Year's Eve, another wild card. So within my team, we're debating, will this New Year's Eve be as good as last year's New Year's Eve? There's an interesting shift this year. Last year, New Year's Eve was on Saturday. This year, it's on a Sunday. It's still a 3-day weekend because most everyone still has the Monday off, right? But in my team, and I'm starting to concur with them, my team thinks it's going to be softer just because of the shift, just literally the day shift. That it's gonna, for whatever reason, people will react, and it's going to be a little bit softer. And we looked at history. So when my team told me that, my first point is get the data. Let me see the data. Prove it to me. I looked at 2006 and 2017 when New Year's Eve fell on a Sunday. I also looked at the month of December for those 2 years, and sure enough, it didn't matter. It was lower than the previous year. So I think that you're going to see a little bit of softness, not a lot, but you're also going to. But what the thing we are pretty certain is rates are not going to be softer. It's going to be the demand side. The rates will continue to be very strong, and particularly in New York City, the iconic areas that have big New Year's celebrations will continue to see very strong rate growth. And so I think that's how December will shape up. It'll be a decent, good December from my point of view. Steph, the other thing you're going to have interesting is you are going to see, again, RevPAR growth a little softer than what we saw in November because I already have we have our projections out. So just a little bit softer. But if I can say this, it'll beat our forecast that we had for December. So even though it's going to be softer than November, I think it's going to be stronger than the forecast we have out there right now.
Now, gentlemen, let's take a look back at 2023 in review in our last few moments of the episode this month. I want to remind you both and our listeners that early January 2023 is the first time these esteemed guests sat down together over the airwaves, as it were, to talk about expectations. And I will link that video in the show notes. But to put our look back at 2023 into context, I want to draw on some of what you said then earlier this year about how you both expected 2023 to play out. And I don't think you need to be worried that you were completely off base because we're going to find out that, gee, these guys really do know what they're doing. So number one was that specter of a recession looming for sure. And you both acknowledged it. Everybody was acknowledging it at the time, but at the same time, you saw RevPAR still growing. So the hope then earlier this year was that this unprecedented event of a recession with RevPAR growth could potentially happen. That unprecedented part being RevPAR growth through a recession. Obviously, didn't quite happen. Feel pretty good about that?
We were half
That's
right.
A good.
There was RevPAR growth. There just wasn't a recession. So
hey,
we were half
right. That's the best half to be right about, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, we were pretty good. I think I was really pleased. I also watched it because you go, hey, I guess I shouldn't see what we said. We missed a few things, and after that recording, I became, if I can say a new term, an anti-reser. I started getting I said, there is going to be no recession. Even though it was originally in our forecast, I was the one started beating the drum going, I don't see it happening again. And it obviously didn't happen. And now people are talking about rolling recession. I'm going, And it became what I really think that's when I started falling on this idea of equilibrium. A lot of supply chain issues, a lot of that was everything just getting back to where it should be. And that's why the recession didn't happen. We're talking about soft landing. I think there's so many things out there. Again, what happened to the pandemic was so unique and so shocking, and it created so many issues around the world on various levels, from labor to supply to, everything was out of whack. Now you're getting that everything's kind of getting back to normal. Will there be a recession in the future? Of course there will be. I didn't see it then. I don't see it now. That was the forecast side. Going back to our forecast, what we missed, we had two things we were dead on. We said in that podcast or that video that international travel was a wild card. We actually said that.
Yes,
and it
you
was.
did.
We knew that it was going to be an impact. I don't think we anticipated the magnitude of that impact for the summer. We just didn't see that one. And that one we did miss. That we said it was out there, but again, from a forecasting standpoint, we didn't build in enough of that into our forecasts. And so that was a miss. And then also, I think on the conference and group side, I predicted that we'd see super strong conference and group in the first two quarters, and actually it's been the third quarter. So, but again, in our defense, if we want to say that, we thought the recession would really take hold in the third quarter. So we thought that there may be some budget constraints. Well, obviously it didn't, and we saw very, very strong group demand in that third quarter, and I think you'll see some of that as well flowing through into the fourth quarter as well.
Yeah, I was firmly on the team recession because that's what Oxford Economics said. So I'm a good foot soldier. So I tried to sell that on every stage I was on all year. And the recession kept being pushed back. And now it turns out there isn't one. And the forecast for next year, according to Tourism Economics, is 2 consecutive quarters of no growth, but not decline. So we're still not in the recession territory. I think one thing we got really right was we suggested that there would be mix shift on the upper end, that the 100% leisure travel demand that drove luxury and upper upscale would be partially substituted with pre-negotiated group rate and corporate negotiated rates, which would then lead to, I'm not sure we said it explicitly, but it led to an ADR decline on the luxury side, and that was spot on. That mix shift absolutely happened. The corporate transient traveler helped us drive some demand numbers, but certainly sort of quote unquote hurt in the makeup of the ADR.
And I think as we think about and looking at indicators, and you were definitely on that camp of there's going to be a recession, and I kept saying there isn't. And it's, for me, it was just observation and looking at lots of other data indicators, including layoffs. I have been watching delinquencies. I've been looking at credit balances, and everything you heard about credit, and that credit card debt is at the highest ever. That's a true fact. But what people forget is that's nominal. It's not even been adjusted for inflation. So it's basically saying groceries that are at the highest point, bread is the most expensive ever. It's a true fact, but until you do the inflation, you don't know adjustments. You don't know if it truly is more expensive than it was in 2019. And when you do that kind of work, you see, no, credit card debt is basically the same as it was in 2019. Delinquencies are slightly up, but nothing to be alarmed about. Layoffs, I looked over all the way back to 2006, how layoffs have been trending. They're no different than they were in 2019 or 2018. So for me, when I'm looking out and thinking about the recession, it's the observation piece, not only the data, that's hard data, but then as I was out last year in every airport I was at, in every city, you go, there is no sign of a recession unless it's really, really on the margins. Because again, just being in New York City last week, you go, what recession? The stores were packed. We were at Bloomingdale's multiple times. We were at Saks. It didn't feel like a recession. It wasn't like people were standing around doing nothing. They were selling.
The data point that supported the recession outlook was absolutely consumer sentiment, because that continues to not be healthy. And the American consumer doesn't feel good. But it turns out it doesn't matter.
What people say and do are two different things. I don't feel great, but I'm still going to spend money.
And I'm still going to go on vacation.
Exactly.
That would be, I think, if you were to ask me what I was most surprised about this year, it would be that element. And that's been the biggest surprise to me throughout the post-pandemic recovery period, is just how much capacity people seem to have, both mentally and socially to get out there and travel and spend, but also in their wallets.
And again, remember, it's all being balanced demographically. I would like to see some of the surveys be more income based, because for our industry, it's really more important because it is of someone with a higher income. There's no doubt, who travels for leisure, especially those that are going outside the country. And so that's the other thing. Always keep in mind when you're looking at all these data points, they're demographically based. But again, our industry is very different in who we target and who stays in hotels. So again, always keep that little sense of doubt. Go look at, look around you. What do you see? If you start seeing, that's the most important thing. What do you see?
The art and science.
Right. It is the art and science. Exactly right. That's why I tell my team that that's what it takes. You cannot just look at the data. My team was very much on the camp that things were going to be really bad in 23. And I was the one, since I do head up forecasting, saying, no, I don't see it. We've got to change this a little bit, raise it a little bit more. That's the subjectivity, because otherwise, if we would just done it on the data and just on GDP, it would have probably been we would have been really off, essentially.
Can you think of anything that happened this year that you did not expect? I think when we look back at what you laid out as expectations, you're pretty close to, if not exactly spot on, to exactly what those big issues were. But can you think of anything that happened that you didn't expect? We had some regional bank failures early this year. Of course, we had nonstop trajectory of interest rate hikes, which, could have been predicted at the time. But anything that, whoa, this didn't happen. A lot of people talk about that distressed assets just not materializing. That's sort of been a trend that's been kicking down the road for the last couple of years. Anything you didn't expect?
Yeah, I was going to go there, Steph. Exactly that. This idea of the wall of distress absolutely did not materialize. We are at the ALIS conference, at the NYU conference. I'm at the HLA Investment Roundtable, the ULI Investment Council. At every one of those meetings, people are looking at each other saying, are you seeing it? Are you seeing it? And everybody was expecting, honestly, a little bit more. Now, you had the headlines of Park giving back the keys to 3,000 rooms in San Francisco, right, but that was clearly the headline grabbing outlier. Everybody else is sort of talk to your banker, figure out the extension, get some more equity in, maybe get some mezz debt and refinance, excuse me, and then live to fight another day in 2025, 2026. The other piece that I clearly didn't expect was the Choice Wyndham conversation.
Oh yeah, agreed. And again, and it continues, right? I would firmly thought that was done, but this week we found out it's not done, and it's still moving forward. So yeah, that was truly unexpected, especially those two. I think we expected mergers, but not that.
That's what makes it fun when you look at predictions and forecasting, which this is your business, both of you. And it's funny because we always talk about in this industry, there's a lot of forecasting that goes on, but not a lot of, hey, let's pin back and look and see what was right and what was wrong. And there are always going to be those unexpected things. And before we close up, I want to let our listeners know, along the lines of those unexpected things, that we want to spread some holiday cheer. So we're dropping a special bonus episode of this podcast the first week of January. And for that, we are going to sit down and talk about expectations for 2024. Isaac and Jan are going to don their velvet jackets and pick up their pipes, take a comfy seat around the fireplace, and pontificate on hotel industry trends that will drive 2024. And hey, judging from what we talked about in this episode, I think they're pretty darn trustworthy. So thank you, gentlemen, as always. And I'll say see you next year.
See you next year. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Bye, Steph. Thank you.
Want more of the latest news and insights from across the global hotel industry? Head to hotelnewsnow.com for up-to-the-minute breaking news and subscribe to the new Hotel News Now podcast to hear directly from industry leaders. Available on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you find podcasts.
This episode of Tell Me More, a hospitality data podcast, was recorded on December 14, 2023. The episode was edited and mixed by Rachel Daub. Find and subscribe to this and all of Hotel News Now's podcasts wherever you like to listen. And remember to find all the industry news you need at hotelnewsnow.com. Thanks for listening.